All right, let's dive into one of the most compelling and, frankly, influential UFO abduction cases in American history, the Allagash Abductions. This is a story about four buddies on a camping trip, a remote wilderness, and one single night that didn't just change their lives, it basically helped write the playbook for our entire modern myth of alien encounters. You see this quote? This is the core of the whole thing. This fragmented, absolutely chilling memory is at the very heart of the Allagash story. It's what bubbled to the surface years after the event, and it's the key to understanding the sheer terror and mystery these men felt. So yeah, this is the perfect place for us to start. Now, to really get what happened in Allagash, we have to understand when it happened. This encounter didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It happened in the 1970s, a decade that was already buzzing with its fascination and a little bit of fear about visitors from other worlds. The cultural stage was perfectly set for something extraordinary.
And the location? Oh, that was absolutely crucial. New England, especially a place as remote as northern Maine, was already steeped in folklore. I mean, for generations, people had been telling stories about weird lights in the sky and strange creatures in the deep woods. So this backdrop meant that when something truly bizarre happened, for some people, it wasn't totally out of left field. It felt almost like the next chapter in a very old story.
You see, this context is so important. The whole idea of alien abduction wasn't brand new in 1976. The Betty and Barney Hill case back in '61 had already dragged the concept into the mainstream. Then you had the Pascagoula incident in '73 with another wild story. So by the time the Allagash guys had their experience, these kinds of narratives were already out there, providing a kind of framework for how you might make sense of something so strange. Okay, so that brings us to the main event. We're deep in the Allagash wilderness in Maine. It's late August 1976. You've got four friends on a camping trip, just trying to get away from it all for a bit.
And these are our guys, the four men at the center of it all. You got the Weiner brothers, Jim and Jack, and their friends Chuck Rock and Tom Reed. It's so important to remember that before this thing blew up into a UFO legend, it was their story, a really personal, deeply human story. So here's where it all kicks off. The guys are out in a canoe on the lake at night, and then they see it. This massive, totally silent, pulsating light just hovering nearby. Imagine that. At first, you'd just be in awe, right? Something beautiful and bizarre in the night sky. But that feeling, well, it wasn't going to last. And this number is the absolute core of the mystery, 4. Because after that strange light vanished, the men realized that 4 hours of their lives had just disappeared. Gone. That was the question that would haunt them for years. What on earth happened in those 4 hours? They got back to their campsite and found their fire, which should have been a big bonfire, had burned down to just embers. They knew something big had happened, but the details were just a blank. And that shared gap in time, that shared amnesia, that's what kicked off an investigation that would uncover memories far stranger than they could have ever imagined.
For years, that question just hung in the air. A total mystery. It wasn't until Jim Weiner, who was dealing with nightmares and some serious trauma from that night, decided to get help. This led all four of them to try hypnotic regression, a tool that was, pretty popular in UFO circles back then, even if it was controversial. All in a desperate attempt to find out what was lost. And what came out of those sessions? Whoa. It became the stuff of legend. All four of them, in totally separate sessions, started recalling this terrifying, cohesive story. They remembered being pulled up into some kind of craft, being put through these weird, invasive physical exams, and coming face to face with beings that were definitely not human. Beings with these huge, dark, almost insect-like eyes. Now, here's what's so fascinating, and honestly what makes the case so compelling. The core of their stories, the beings, the examination, was stunningly similar across all four men. But the little details, what the inside of the ship looked like or how they personally felt during it all, those things varied. And those little differences, that's what everyone, believers and skeptics, really latched onto. And that's the thing we have to keep coming back to. For these guys, this wasn't some cool story to tell at parties. As Jim Weiner made really clear, it was a real trauma, something that stuck with them and had a huge psychological impact for the rest of their lives. So how does something so personal, so deeply traumatic, become one of the most famous abduction stories of all time? Well, the story took on a life of its own, spreading way beyond the four men who actually lived it. Let's unpack how that happened.
See, the legend of Allagash didn't just happen. It was like a perfect storm. At its core, you had the raw, powerful personal trauma of the witnesses. Then, you throw in a huge dose of media sensationalism, fanning the flames. All of that was layered on top of the region's existing spooky folklore, and finally, the whole thing was embraced by the growing UFO culture of the time.
And you absolutely cannot underestimate the role of the media in this. Once the story got out, it was everywhere. Books, documentaries, TV talk shows, they turned the men's private, painful memories into a public spectacle. It put the story on the map for sure, but it also opened the floodgates for intense scrutiny and disbelief. And this loops right back to what we were talking about with the folklore. The Allagash story didn't just exist on its own. It got absorbed into the cultural DNA of New England. It was like it slotted right in, becoming this modern myth built on a foundation of old legends about strange things in the woods, which just made it feel that much more powerful to people. So here we are, decades later, and people are still talking about Allagash, still debating it, still analyzing it. It left this huge, complicated mark, not just on the lives of those four men, but on the entire field of UFO studies and on our pop culture. And honestly, it's as unresolved today as it ever was. I mean, just look at the ripple effect. For UFO researchers, it really pushed them to look beyond just eyewitness accounts, to bring in psychology and folklore. For movies and TV, it practically created the template for how to tell an abduction story. And in pop culture in general, you can see echoes of the Allagash incident in science fiction to this day.
And that really is the question that hangs over all of this, isn't it? The Allagash case kind of forces you to stare right at that blurry line. Where does a real, traumatic, personal memory end, and where does the cultural story we tell ourselves begin? The Allagash mystery lasts not because we don't have information, but because all that information just leads to deeper, tougher questions about memory, belief, and the very nature of our reality.